Well, hello, welcome to the channel. My name's Johnny, and you're watching Hillbilly Modeling. So this is going to be part 6 of our Trumpeter Russian SAM-6 anti-aircraft missile vehicle in 1/35 scale. And I think in the last video I said we'd finish it up in this video, but after reconsidering all the things that we actually need to get done to wrap this one up, I don't think we're going to make it. So we're going to focus in this video on painting our missiles, getting those done, and also our log. We have a wooden log that's made out of polystyrene, and we got to make it look like wood. So we need to do that. And I have no idea how we're going to do that, but we'll figure it out as we go. And also we're going to do some chipping. A little bit of sponge chipping and everything, and get our decals on and get everything really ready for the weathering process and the final assembly, which I don't think we're going to get to all that in this video. So let's go ahead and jump down to the bench and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear the bench. Now, the very first thing I think we need to address will be our missiles. So, as you can see, we've already painted the white on. We did that earlier when we were doing our pre-shading on our vehicle. And as you can see here, there is no measurements for where that white is supposed to go down on our actual missile. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do that. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to take a piece of cardstock here. This is kind of a maybe a dark yellow. It is bright though, isn't it? But we're going to use this cardstock to make ourselves a little template and kind of a gauge to make sure that we get our masking for those white warheads as close to exact on each of our missiles, because we have these 3 missiles that are going to be lined up on their launch rails, and if that masking is a different a different distance from the tip of the missile, that's going to kind of stand out, and we really don't want that to happen. So we got this kind of L-shaped little gauge we got there. So that right there, we're just going to line it up with the very tip of the actual missile, and I'm going to put a mark here where it's just too long. We're going to cut that off. We don't need anything interfering with us there. It might still be a little bit long, but well, we'll deal with that. As you can see, we can set right at the tip of the missile itself, and then we can decide how far down we want it. So I did put a little tick mark on it, and then I put a index line on our gauge. And now we can just transfer that straight to the missile itself, and we can do all 3 of our missiles the same way. So when it comes to putting masking tape around a round object, or a cylindrical object, that's a big word for me, cylindrical. But what I'm using here is a piece of that cardstock with a straight edge on it. And if we wrap it around and we set it, the corners of it there underneath my thumb and finger, I should say, we can kind of pinch it around, and we just have to line up to our little tick mark that we put on the missile, and now we'll just clamp that into place. And so that gives us a straight edge all the way around the missile there that we can use as a guide to go ahead and mask off our warhead. So with that done, we just take a little piece of masking tape here. Now this is, to me, a masking tape that I'm using, and putting it up against the cardstock, we will be able to get this really even and straight all the way around the missile. So that's a little tip for you guys. Now it only works on objects that have parallel sides. Does that make sense? Like cylindrical or squares or what have you. If it's tapered, the little cardstock trick, it doesn't work. So here in this case, though, we're kind of lucky because we're able to get that done, and then we can just remove our cardstock. I just want to make sure that our masking tape is adhered to the surface right there at the edge. And since we're going to be spraying this with our airbrush, it's a good idea to go ahead and protect from overspray. We don't want that brilliant white that we have there to get any green or yellow or any other color on it. So I'm just using a piece of paper towel here, or napkin, paper napkin, and yeah, we're just going to take and kind of tape that around there and make sure that it's stuck pretty good. So oftentimes this kind of tries to unfurl itself after a while, so we're going to go ahead and put an extra piece of tape around it just to make sure that it's secure and it doesn't come off on us, especially while we're at the paint booth. That would be disastrous. So we've got the other two missiles to do, and here we are through the magic of video. All three missiles are masked up. So I've decided to put some yellow stripes on our missile. Now, one of our diagrams here, or painting and marking guides, shows these yellow marks on the missile, and I think that would look pretty good on our vehicle. So regardless of which version you decide to build, I think that, you know, these missiles, what these markings are for, I have no idea. I just like the color contrast. So I'm going to use a little bit of that craft paint yellow there and some of our Vallejo water-based acrylic thinner and mix it up for my airbrush, because those craft paints are really thick, and we do need to get that thinned out enough so that it doesn't cause a problem when we go to spray it through our airbrush. And so now we can move on to the paint booth. And what I'm doing here is I'm marking our missiles with all three of them lined up together, more or less where I want those yellow stripes to go. I just want to make sure that I've got enough yellow paint in the correct areas so that when we go to mask them off, that we have plenty of coverage on the missile. And I'm doing this over the gray primer here, because that's much easier to get that brilliant yellow than it would be if we were primed in a really dark color. So putting the yellow on over a white or light gray background or primer is much preferable. That way we get to our brilliant yellow color much sooner. So now all we got to do is go in and just fill in those areas that we've already have determined where we want some yellow paint. And be very careful because when you're painting bright colors over light colors with an airbrush, you can oversaturate the area and end up with a run. Ask me how I know. So just spray it enough to where it kind of looks a little wet and move on. And I do end up putting like 3 different coats there. So here I'm using a 1mm wide piece of Tamiya masking tape, and I'm going to use that as a spacer. And I'm putting it right up against the masking tape where we masked off our warhead. So we're going to run that completely around the missile. And what this is going to do is space out where we're going to put our first yellow stripe on our missile. So next, we're going to come back in with the same 1mm wide piece of masking tape, and we're going to mask off right next to that 1mm wide masking tape spacer that we just put on there. Yeah, I know it's kind of hard to see because the Tamiya tape is yellow and we're masking over yellow, but I hope you guys can see it okay. Just going to want to be careful. I want to get this straight around the missile here. And we're going off of the original masking for the warhead. So that's why it's important to say use that cardstock, or to make sure that your initial masking is actually correct. Otherwise, everything's going to be a little askew and a little bit off, and we really don't want to do that. So just take your time when you're setting these up. So we'll get this masked, and then we can go back and pull our spacer masking tape off. And here you can see that I'm doing that. And we'll get this out of the way. So next up, I am going to measure just from those little, I don't know if they're narcels or what they are, but I've decided to just put a piece of masking, or a piece of masking tape to mark off where I want the next stripe on our missile. And so this is ahead of those forward guide fins. Same process that we did for masking off our warhead. And there is no measurements in the instructions or anything where these stripes go, so you just kind of figure out where you want to put it and just kind of go with it. The important thing here is that we do each and every missile exactly the same, because these missiles are all going to be lined up one next to another on their launch rails. And if our measurements are off on one missile versus the next missile, then it's going to have a funny staggered look, and we don't want that. And so we just continue on down. Now, when it comes to the stripes towards the rear of the missile here, or towards the nozzle end, I should say, we do have to mask over a little bit of undulation there in the surface, and that's okay. And what I'm using is the leading edge of our guide fins there to set that first piece of masking tape. So that's kind of our guide of where this masking tape needs to go. And we just want to make sure we get it pressed down into those little grooves there. And so I'm going to move up to this larger masking tape. Now, the masking tape I was using for the large stripes is 6mm. But now we're going to move up to a 10. And we're going to kind of do this the same way. It's the same concept that I had for masking off that thin stripe at the warhead. We're going to use the 10mm tape as a spacer. And it doesn't have to be perfect down into the grooves and everything. It just needs to be straight around the missile, using our first piece that we put down next to those guide fins as a guide. And now we can mask off where our second stripe is going to go. And just making sure that it's all pressed down there in all those little spots. We want to avoid, as much as we can, any touch-up that we need to do from possible a little bit of spray getting up underneath the tape, and we don't want that. So when we go to paint this, we're going to be very careful not to oversaturate the paint in those areas. Put it on in thin coats and kind of dry it. You can use a hair dryer to help speed that process up if you need to. And then we can remove our 10mm spacer tape out of the way. There we go. And so that's the same concept we're going to do for the other two missiles. We want everything masked up exactly the same. And check your measurements before you start spraying. So I need to cover up all that bright yellow. And so I'm going to use this German Panzer Gray Vallejo water-based acrylic primer. And it is mixed up for my airbrush. So we're going to be really careful spraying this on. I don't want it to be too saturated next to that masking tape and kind of seep up underneath it. That would be bad. And if you have a habit of mixing your paint too thin, that can cause somewhat of a problem. So it is a kind of a dance that you do in between having it too thin or having it too thick where it won't spray at all. So it just takes a little bit of practice there. And we're just going to go ahead and get that gray onto our missile. Now we're going to use the same base color that we used for the vehicle, which is that olive green there, but I want it just a little bit darker than the base paint that we used on the vehicle itself. So just a drop of black, and we get it mixed up really good there. Because the missiles are going to be newer, I assume, since it's kind of an ammunition style component, than the vehicle itself, which tends to be left outside and gets a little bit more sun faded. So now we'll be able to go in and just go ahead and spray our green on. I do put on, I think, about 3 coats. Not worried about pre-shading or anything like that, because these missiles really need to look pretty much pristine versus the vehicle itself. The vehicle gets used a lot, lots of dits and or scratches and chips and dings and what have you. So, but the missiles, that's something that you really need to protect. So that wouldn't be all tore up or scratched or abused. That's probably what I'm looking for there, abused. All right, so after we get our green on, now's the kind of the moment of truth there. So now we can start removing our masking tape and find out how well we did or how poorly we did. so, um, so I started off with that little bitty yellow stripe there, and now we're going to go ahead and do the warhead in there. I'm sure the warhead's bigger than just that little white tip, but anyway, we're going to continue to go on down. Now you want to be very careful here and remove your tape carefully. I'm not sure how stuck to the paint it is underneath, and it's always a good idea that if there's an area you're going to mask over, to make sure that it has plenty of drying time. I don't think I mentioned that before, but you don't want that paint to be uncured when you put your masking tape on. So there we go. Actually, it looks pretty good. I'm kind of really excited about that. That looks really nice. Yeah. So as long as all our measurements are good and all 3 of our missiles are the same, we're in good shape. So now we're going to move on to a little bit of sponge chipping here, and I'm just going to use this German gray as our chipping medium. Now this is a synthetic sponge that I'm using, and I have pulled little bits and pieces off of the end of it so that it's kind of ragged. I don't really want a smooth surface there, so we just load that sponge up with a little bit of paint, and then we can test it on the bottom side of the vehicle just to see what kind of pattern we got and whether or not we have too much paint loaded in our sponge. And if it is, then we can get rid of the paint, or in this case, I didn't have enough. I dabbed too much off. So we'll put some more on there and get it reloaded, and then we can go ahead and start our sponge chipping. So really what we're looking at, and as you can see here, I got a piece that was just a little bit too big. So a wet Q-tip will take care of that. And then we're just going to go on around the vehicle here, catching corners. And we can also use this process to kind of take those large flat areas that we have on the vehicle too, and put a couple of little chips here and there too, whether it be rock dings or you can imagine with missiles being fired off of this vehicle, it's going to kick up rocks and dirt and debris, anything loose on the ground, which may come up and make contact with the vehicle. So a little bit of splattering here and there is okay. So all the areas where you think that there's going to be a little bit of wear, that's fine. Now I'm not really going for a really heavily chipped vehicle because under Russian service, I don't think these got a whole lot of field use in combat, which means there'd be plenty of time to get them back to the motor pool and touch them up and what have you. It being a major weapon system, you can imagine that a lot of care was taken to keep these vehicles operational during the Cold War eras. Now we don't want to forget about our road wheels. Now these are that pressed steel type road wheel, so we just want to make sure that we get just a little bit of that continuity going between the vehicle itself and of course the road wheels being down next to the ground. They're going to get a little bit of chipping too, so we're going to make sure that we've got a little bit of paint missing there. And of course, you know, your drive sprockets. And also those return idlers, they're going to be subject to the same type of debris, so we're going to go ahead and put just a few chips on them. So with that chipping done, and while we're letting that all dry, we need to turn our attention to the log. Now, it is already Panzer Gray. That's that dark Panzer Gray that we primed everything with. So what I've decided to do is start off with this antique nickel here. And basically, if you look at any tree, more or less, it's kind of a brown gray or a gray on gray, and some really dark grays or even blacks. So I'm going over I guess this is dark Panzer Gray with this antique nickel over top of it. And we're just going to sponge this on in a non-consistent pattern. You don't want to set up a pattern on it because it needs to be totally random, because that's the way it is in nature. And so I'm just trying to fill it out here and get that first layer of gray on there. And as you can see, some of it's thicker in some places and some of it's thinner in others, and you know, that's kind of okay, I think. So this is kind of the look that we got going on. It's kind of patchy, and that's all right, because next up we're going to come in with this color here, which is heather gray, and it's just a lighter gray, and we're going to do the exact same process over top of that darker gray that's on top of the darker gray. Yeah, I know there's probably a better way to do this. I just can't really wrap my head around it, but I think it's going to be all right in the end. Of course, you guys are going to let me know, I'm sure. But it needs to appear kind of more natural. So this is kind of like highlights for bark. Yeah, I know, it's an interesting look. But yeah, so we're just going to sponge this on, I guess, and hope for the best. So with that done, we can come in and use this panel liner. Once it's completely dry, now we didn't seal this, right? So this is going to kind of give us a brown effect for our bark. So with the brown Tamiya panel liner, which is an enamel product versus the water-based acrylics that we've been using. So the only problem here is that you need to expect that it's going to kind of soak in a little bit to that flat paint. So now I'm going to go to the Testors enamel thinner here, or you can use odorless thinner for the same operation here. I'm just going to dry most of that cotton swab out, and we're just going to kind of give it a light touch across the entire log here. Kind of removing all the excess that is on the prominent raised surfaces, and that'll leave more of the brown panel liner in that texture for the log there. And that's kind of what we got. So it doesn't look too bad, I don't think. All right, so let's use this craft paint right here. This is called Camel, and which is a kind of a yellow sand brown kind of color, closer to a tan, I guess. And I'm just going to paint it in on the ends of the logs here. Now it isn't a water-based acrylic paint, so we're going to be able to kind of put stuff over top of it. So I'm just painting it on close to the edge where the bark ring would be on the log. And we'll paint both ends of it and make sure that that's completely dry before we move on. So next I'm going back to that same oil artist color paint that we used on our tools, and that's just regular artist oil paint. And I'm kind of using the thinner, the enamel thinner, as a carrier for it here. Just kind of building it up over that camel color there a little bit. And I use a hairdryer to let that dry a little bit for us. And then a cocktail stick or toothpick. And we're just going to put a little swirly line around it there. Kind of drawing through the artist oil paint there a little bit. Kind of give us a little bit of like tree rings. So I'm kind of interested in seeing how that looks on the vehicle. So we'll go ahead and stick it on there and see what kind of contrast we got going on. And that doesn't look too bad, really. It almost looks like a log. So, yeah, I need to improve my log painting skills, but I think that'll pass. You guys let me know in the comments what you think of the log. All right. So now we need to seal everything. I'm going to use this Gloss Clear X22 by Tamiya. Thinned for my airbrush, of course. And, of course, your mixture is going to be different than mine. You're just going to have to play with that. But what we're doing is we're preparing the surface for panel liner and also for our decals, or decals if you prefer. Speaking of panel liner, we're going to be using the black on this green surface here. Now, I do like to thin this out quite a bit. I've kind of learned that, a little practice there over the years. And next up, I'm not going to use the brush that's in the panel liner bottle. I'm going to use my own brush for that. The long bristles holds a lot of product, and then the really pointed end of it really helps us to target the areas that we're going to put this panel liner on. And what this does, of course, is to give us those little shaded areas and helps pull out those details, all the fine details that's on the model. Kind of a fake shadow and a little bit of a line there kind of separates these out, and it allows these details to stand out for us. Now, this is an enamel-based product, and we're putting it over an acrylic, so we shouldn't have any problems when it comes to cleanup. And we're going to go around the vehicle here and do any bolts or seams or anything that's molded in, covers, just whatever, just to make sure that it gives these items their best opportunity to actually stand out against that green paint. Now, when it comes to cleanup, and you're going to have cleanup when you use panel liner, I'm just using the enamel thinner. You could probably use white spirits too, or odorless spirits to do the same thing. Since I have enamel thinner, that's what I'm going to use. And anywhere we have too much panel liner, we'll just simply blend it away, or use it just to kind of wet it down a little bit and soak it up and move it off, and you can clean it right off your brush. And during this process, I do recommend that you clean your brush every now and then so that you don't have a lot of buildup of that panel liner. Because if you do, you're going to end up smearing panel liner back onto the vehicle. Now, I'm using a brush for most of it because a lot of these are just real fine details, but there are some instances where you can use a cotton swab, slightly dampened with a little bit of that enamel thinner to get broader areas, and that really helps with the cleanup too. Now, if your detail is really fine, be careful using that technique because you can soak that panel liner out of those little details. So I really want to clean up around these little moldings here. Russian vehicles have these ribs that are pressed into a lot of the thin metal parts. Kind of gives it strength for the metal work. But we kind of want that to stand out, but we do need to clean up any panel liner that's kind of excessive and going over onto the flat surfaces of those panels. So I'm just using a brush for that. And you don't have to get real close to those creases, just whatever you can do. Next up is decals. So Trumpeter has this tape. They tape this wax paper over top of our decals to protect them. But that cellophane type tape can affect the water absorbency into that into our decal sheet. So I'm taking that off, and I'm also separating out the decals that we're going to be using for whichever version you decide to build. For this one, we're going to use the diamonds and the vehicle number there. And you want to make sure that you trim off those little indicator numbers that are on the decal sheet. So we will be using micro saw and micro set. I don't think micro saw will be necessary, but the micro set definitely. And I use a different brush for each one of those solvents. So when it comes to these decals, they are water slide, which means you need to soak them in water, and that will go ahead and loosen the adhesive that is attaching the film to the actual paper, and it's also the adhesive for causing the decal to stick to the model. So in order to help that along, we're going to use micro set, which is formulated to assist. I guess that's the way we used to say, to assist those decals into adhering to the model. So I checked and make sure that the model slides on the paper, and we're going to get rid of most of the water. We don't need a lot of excess water there washing away our micro set. So now we're just going to slide our decal off into place. And if you noticed, since we're putting this on over a gloss clear, I did put that micro set down, or not, yeah, micro set. I'm going to get mixed up here. The micro set down in dots so that we try to cover the whole area there. And it will kind of wick out underneath the decal. Now these decals are really, really thin. So I do want to caution you about that. Unlike Tamiya decals, which you can pull rather large Tamiya decals right off the sheet and not have to worry about them folding up on you and sticking to themselves. But these Trumpeter decals are really very thin. So you want to be very careful and make sure that you slide them off of your backing paper and right onto the model. Otherwise, anything that's large or thin, it will fold up on you, and you'll have somewhat of an issue there. So I'm just using a cotton bud here, or Q-tip if you please, and I'm kind of squeezing out any excess micro set or water from underneath to kind of press this decal down right onto the surface. And I don't suspect that we'll have much issue here with our decals because they are so thin. Now thick decals, you can have some silvering going on underneath them, but I think these are going to be okay. So here we are. There's only 4 decals to put on. I put a vehicle number on it, and then the diamond unit designator there. And you can kind of see the film there, you know, beneath, especially for the numbers, the carrier film. But I don't think that's going to be a problem, really, because these decals are so thin. They should really melt right in when we put our flat clear coat on over top of it. Now I let my decals dry overnight. You make sure that they are well dry before you go to the next step. And that's going to be putting our matte acrylic varnish. And we're going to put this over everything that we've already done, all of our paint work. And I do have to thin this out a little bit here. So this is the airbrush thinner that I'm using. And it is a Vallejo airbrush thinner for water-based acrylics. And just make sure that you follow the instructions. You want to shake it well, all right, because it does have the ability to settle on you. So going back and looking at our decals here, now we've got, I think I put 2 coats on of our flat acrylic. And boy, those decals really just melted right in. And they look like they're part of the painted surface, which is really what we want it to look like. That's the goal. That's what we want it to do. You don't want to see the edges of that carrier film. Well, all right. That's about all we got done so far here. I mean, we got a lot done, but we didn't get finished, of course. So the major thing that we did do is get our missiles all painted up here, and I really do like the contrast here between the yellows and the greens and the white warhead and all that. So those look really good. The important thing here is the missiles are going to be newer than the vehicle itself, so, or at least that's the way I see it. Seeing how the missiles are, it's a major weapon system, but it's more like ammunition, so you imagine they'll be well protected, not left out in the weather and what have you. Whereas the vehicle itself, yeah, it's going to get a little bit more weathered. So that's a decent contrast, I think, between the two. So that came out really well. And I think our log came out okay. I mean, it kind of looks like a log. That's a technique that I definitely need to work on. So something to keep in mind there. And, oh, our decals. Yeah, so these decals, I will say, now they're very thin on this trumpeter kit, but they really just melted right into the painted surface there. And when we put our flat clear coat over top of it, you can't really tell that there's a carrier film, you know, that strings all them numbers together. So I mean, it really looks the part, like they're painted on. So kudos to Trumpeter and those thin carrier film type decals. They did a really good job there. So that's going to wrap this up. We will, I promise, we will wrap this model up in the next video, which will be part 7. So special thanks to all my subscribers. It's because of you guys I keep making these videos. And if you like this video, I hope that you give it a like. And also, if you are new to the channel and not a subscriber, I hope that today I earned your subscription. So if you have any comments, leave me a comment. I answer everybody. Everybody that I can. I will say this, there are a couple of individuals that have responded in the comment section, but I believe that their settings is such in YouTube that it doesn't allow responses. So I couldn't answer you back. So if you've set and given me a comment in the past and you hadn't gotten an answer from me, check your settings, because you might accidentally be blocking me, or maybe you're blocking me on purpose. Either way. So okay, well, that's it. I tell you what, I will see you guys next Friday, so you guys stay safe.